Please welcome to the stage the star of Heretic, Hugh Grant. How do you feel having to follow up that trailer? Do you feel like you have to apologize and promise you're not so scary in real life or something?
But I am.
You brought us all into this room and locked the doors, and now we have to prepare for what comes next.
I do love to kill.
You know, there's a moment I noticed in this trailer watching it, and I want to talk about how you built this character in general, but you have the line, "It might make you want to die," and then there's this kind of smile grimace that you give that is so terrifying in that context, although it can be a very endearing expression in other people. Does that feel, it feels indicative to me of the performance. I wonder if that feels like indicative of who this Mr. Reed character is for you.
Well, it's strange to talk about a film that no one's seen.
Yes, we're going to try to avoid spoilers.
There's a part of him, I think I can say without spoiling anything, that I always thought was a kind of groovy professor. That he'd been the teacher at university who thought he was pretty funny and liked to make everything kind of fun, guys. Get down with the young people. So that's all part of that.
And sometimes we like those professors, and sometimes we would rather not be in a closed room with them, right?
Well, that's exactly right. That was my theory, is that he might have been quite good at attracting a following. He's quite controversial in his views and iconoclastic. He might have attracted a following to start with, and then people would start saying, I don't like those.
I'd rather you not be
those mini seminars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to rewind back to the beginning, I mean, when you are given a script like this, you get a chance to dig into a character like that. You know, you've been on this interesting run in the past 10 years or so of, I think, surprising us, maybe surprising yourself at every turn. So when this one comes to you, what grabbed you? What made it feel like something you could sink yourself into?
There was lots of appealing elements. I mean, I haven't done a horror film since The Lair of the White Worm, which I know is...
there we go. I knew someone in this audience was going to appreciate that deep cut.
It's the heavy potheads who like that film. And so I've wanted to do one of those for a long time. I like these writer-directors very much. I loved A Quiet Place in particular. And I thought A24 was cool. And I'm so cool, I thought it was a perfect match.
Why a horror film? Why had you wanted to do one?
Well, I'm drawn to nastiness, and I think a lot of quite interesting stuff is being done in that area at the moment, particularly by A24. I'm still getting over Midsummer.
Oh yeah.
Which I watched with my wife one evening. You know, there were all the DVDs lying around from sent out by the Academy. And we thought we need something to cheer us up tonight. Well, my wife's Swedish, and I said, oh, this one looks jolly, and it's about Sweden. It looks like a summary.
It's very bright sunlight. What could go wrong? It says bright sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, we've both been in counseling ever since. Yeah.
So you knew their work from A Quiet Place. Scott Beck and Brian Woods are the writer and directors. And I'm always interested in, when you've worked with a lot of directors, you kind of know what is helpful for you to work with, what's not, who are the kind of people you want to work with. When you met with them, what made you confident that, like, these are guys you want to put yourself in the hands of, that you wanted to build a working relationship with them?
Well, everything's a punt, obviously. But there was a Zoom, and they seemed a good combination of extremely bright, a little bit weird, but also to have a sense of humor. And so yeah, that was I was happy to take that punt. I mean, there's always the other thing with pairs, you know, who leads and who follows, who's Arthur, who's Martha, do they quarrel? But it was fine.
Had you worked with a director pair before? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, well, the Whites brothers directed directed about a boy.
Oh, one of the Wachowskis, of course, and Cloud Atlas.
Wachowski's
Yeah,
Cloud
and Tom Tickler,
Yeah.
So it is a different dynamic when you've got two people who are running the show versus just one.
Yes, and because I'm quite neurotic on film sets as a performer, I have to have peace and harmony around me, and I wouldn't like it if they quarreled. I don't even like it if two makeup ladies don't get on. I need harmony.
You don't want to know the gossip that's happening in the makeup trailer?
I definitely want to know that.
That's what say me too. I mean, your process for developing characters, you've worked on over a long time where you do just these really deep dives into who these characters are and what you're doing. And again, we don't want to spoil too much about what happens in Heretic, but is that something you have to let directors know, like, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to build that character? Is that something everybody needs to be in on, or is that just your own work?
Well, it depends on the director, massively. I could name 3 very well-known directors who will not talk about the character at all. I mean, at all. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Just bring me something on the day. And then others, like these 2 actually, who loved it. And I am insane with this. I mean, it was months and months of every single line or moment, long email conversations back and forth about what's going on, why does he do that? Do we think this was something that happened in his childhood? Blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
On and on. Maybe they were rolling their eyes, but they did answer them all.
And what did you feel like when you got to the end of that process? Like, what did you get, in general, what do you get from that process that you wouldn't be able to get from just the script?
Well, it's a really good question, because it may be entirely futile.
But you've done it for a long time, clearly.
Yeah, I hope that it means nothing is recited. It's not, it says here he picks up the cup of tea and says, "Good afternoon, monsieur." You know why you do it, and you, therefore you have a reason to do it. And hopefully that, and having all this huge biography written of the character, I sometimes think makes the character have more texture on the screen. But I admit that a lot of the work I do may be because doing work makes me less nervous. As the day approaches of beginning, I get more and more nervous, and if I've done 4 or 5 hours of intense character study, I relax a bit.
It kind of wears you out a little bit. You can't.
Yeah.
Did you always have that process when you were doing film acting, or did you get to it at a certain point?
It got considerably more extreme in the last 10 years.
Okay.
It was hard to do with some of the romantic comedies. I would dig into character, and it just kept saying, "It's you, Hugh."
And you didn't want to hear that.
But also it wasn't true, really. I mean, I say that. It wasn't really true. I don't know how I let that happen. I look at my children, I got quite young children, and suddenly the other day my little girls wanted to watch 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and I watched it and I thought, but that's a character performance actually, because, this person is, that's not me, and never has been me, and was, it was really based on Richard Curtis himself. I don't know if you've met him, but he's quite diffident and behaves a bit like that. Anyway, so in a way, even they were character parts.
I think we can all watch your performances over the past 10 years and see the change, but I wonder if there was a turning point for you where you said, I'm going to start doing more of this work, deep diving. I'm going to actively try not to play myself. Do you remember a point where that happened for you, where there was an active decision, or was it more of a gradual thing?
Well, it was, as I've said often, it was a lot of it was just through getting old and ugly. No one wants you to play the leading man anymore. And
you're a leading man in this. What are you talking?
Yeah, but you know what I mean, a leading romantic.
Sure.
And thank God, I've been there, done that. I love those films, and I'm proud of them, and happy that people still like a lot of them. But it was time to move on, and I always thought if I had anything to bring to acting at all, it was more in the line of characters, because that's where I sort of started out. It was doing voices, doing characters I'd invented. I had a comedy show in London with 2 friends that was all just characters, and it's more fun, it's more fulfilling, it's a bit more creative. And, you know, any actor will say it's juicier to play the baddie than the goodie.
Well, in this movie, I think you've said that you really, you know, a monologue you much prefer to a close-up of having to show your face. But Heretic really has both. There's a lot of long conversational monologues, then there's some tight close-ups where there's really small movements that kind of give away who this guy might be underneath. So that feels like a really powerful combination of working with both sides of what you've been able to do on screen.
Well, it's true. I always thought I'm better at talking than not talking in films. But thank you for noticing, Katey.
You're very welcome.
I'm proud of some of the close-ups in this film because they were long, at least in shooting. They're not once the film's edited together, but you know they were long 3-page scenes, with the girls talking and the camera pushing in on me, which I dreaded. But I've got better at that. The combination of weird stuff with headphones and Beethoven and breathing and achieving, I mean, God, all those things that sort of arsehole actors talk about, like, you know, being present and being still.
Those are real, right?
Yeah, I had 1 or 2 moments when I think I might have been a bit still. And it was great.
Well, you've got Chloe East and Sophie Thatcher, who you really have, you know, we see some of it in the trailer, but there are these long, intense scenes of kind of the back and forth and some mind games and some mental effort there. And that's a real, you have to really work that out as a dynamic with your fellow actors ahead of time, is my understanding. So they're fairly, you know, they're young, but they're not that new to the business. So where did you guys find your middle ground to make those scenes together work so well?
Well, that's eternally difficult with films because, on the one hand, you don't want to pre-rehearse everything because film cameras hate that. They spot pre-rehearsal a mile off, and those are never the dailies that end up in the edit. But on the other hand, you can't, if you don't rehearse at all, you can suddenly find terrible gremlins have popped up in the performance that are going to destroy a scene you shoot later. And so we did a certain amount of rehearsal, but not that much. And then in the end, I realized that I was in the hands of 2 brilliant actresses. It was almost annoying at moments.
It works with the character, though. It's annoying.
Yeah, it does. And it was so hard for them. It's weird. People haven't seen the film, but they have to start having misgivings about me about 20 minutes into the film.
No.
And just go on getting increasingly more terrified for another 50 minutes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the film's not that long. I can't do maths. But anyway, for a long time. And that was very, very hard for them. But I think they did it triumphantly.
Well, that dynamic you were talking about in the beginning of the hip college professor who, you know, loves lecturing people, I feel like there's not a lot of real Mr. Reeds in the world, but that, you know, men who love to like tell a woman what they really ought to know and how the world works. We've all seen that a lot, and I don't, not to name names, but have you seen that in real life, and did you take any of that into building this character?
Well, the mansplainer.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, he is, I suppose, a mansplainer, but of a very sophisticated variety. He's good at it, and I think good at holding an audience, and endlessly manipulative, and probably was from a kid. He reminds me very much of one of my sons. Where it's like talking to the KGB. Everything he says, you think, now what do you really mean by that? What's your motive? And with this character, everything's calculated. Nothing is off the cuff. It's a performance in it, and like his these elaborate models he makes and things. It's all pre-existing, and those people who they know they're a bit weird, and they probably don't have enough friends or any, and compensate by endlessly doing tricks on people, pranks. He's that guy too. And
proving how clever they are. That's people love that.
Yeah.
The other character type I thought about is politicians, which you have encountered plenty of in your, your other work, your campaign work, who will smile at you but plan your doom behind your back.
Yes.
I didn't know if that felt true for you as well.
Yeah, very much.
You know that type?
Well, horribly well now, but that's always more interesting, again, for some reason, for actors, if there's... You know, there's a whole thing about, oh no, I must emote as an actor, I must emote. And I think you must, but very often it's so buried, your emotions, and there's layers and layers and layers of defense and mask over it. And for me, at least, masks are what it's all about. And then just the occasional glimpse of the throbbing jelly deep inside.
Is that the key to the close-up then? That you have those emotions so deep down that it doesn't take very much to reveal something?
Yeah, that's what you're trying to do, and sometimes you'll do a variety of close-ups, one leaning on the masked side and one pure throbbing jelly, and then one which alternates between the two. And then, of course, you're in the hands of the directors and the editors, and you don't know what they're going to use. But I used to, in the old days, think there was a definitive performance that I wanted to give. And particularly in the comedies, I knew how to time a line, and I just do take after take trying to recreate that timing. And that was a huge mistake. I learned after a bit, especially watching really good actors, variety is what you need. All your takes should be completely different. Meryl Streep never did 2 similar takes in the film I did with her. They were dramatically different. And it was very useful for the editor and the filmmakers, and keeps the performance fresh.
Is that learning to give up control too, just knowing that you're going to do a bunch of different stuff and the director gets to decide what
Yeah,
it looks like?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And did that take a while to decide, to realize that was how it had to be?
Yes, in acting and in life. Give up control.
But when you have young kids, there's this all over.
Precisely. I'm quite evangelical about that now, because I watch everyone micromanaging their kids right through up to they're in their bloody 20s, and you find these parents saying, "I'm just going to buy them a new SIM card," and they just leave them alone.
I mean, but you have young enough kids that it's almost like they're in charge of deciding how you're going to raise them at some point. I have young kids too. I feel like it's every day is a new adventure of figuring out who's in charge.
Have you read this chap, Jonathan's?
Jonathan Haidt book about the cell phones? I'm scared of it. I feel like if I read it, I will worry forever about what kind of world my kids are growing up in. Did you read it?
Yeah, I'm a big follower.
So no cell phones for
no cell phones.
Decided?
The biggest favor we could do them is to take away their cell phones.
Yeah.
And to let them be free and not track them. You know, people say we give them a phone because we like to know where they are. How mentally appalling for a child to grow up thinking I'm permanently tethered.
Yeah.
I'm never free. I'm never allowed to take any risks. Anyway, we're not here to talk about this.
But look, whatever these guys want to hear us talk about,
okay.
You can go for it. I mean, so you're working with these young actresses in this movie. You worked with Timothée Chalamet last year. This isn't the age of the kids we're talking about, but you're watching this generation coming up and what's different for them and what's available to them that wasn't for you, or vice versa. Are you notice anything in general in terms of what it's like for an up-and-coming actor now as opposed to when you started?
Well, they're bloody good.
They are.
But I do think, not any of the 3 you just mentioned, but I have noticed that when you scratch the surface, they're quite troubled in a way that I don't remember actors in their 20s being troubled when I was in my 20s. They're quite troubled, and 9 times out of 10 they'll say, "Yeah, I'm actually on this medication. It's amazing. It makes me feel much calmer." Why are you on pills? And I think that's worrying. And my personal feeling is that Jonathan Haidt's right. That,
well, do you think it's the media, or social media plus media, like the spotlight that they're under now, that wasn't the same?
I think particularly if you're in the spotlight or semi in the spotlight, and then there's this gravitational pull to just check social media and what's it saying about me, and then and we know the way social media works now. It feeds off, it loves a storm. Well, we create a storm about that because he played an Oompa Loompa and he should have been a small person.
Who could you be talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, it's comic. The last 8 or 9 outings I've had, that you notice there's always a storm.
So you do see the storms. You don't cut yourself off from it entirely.
My people see the
Sure.
storm. And I say to them, it's okay. Honestly, this is what the algorithms create. They take perhaps an interview, they might take this interview and cunningly take away context, tone, particularly humor, and find some little tiny bit that is, it by itself looks quite scandalous or controversial, and that becomes the truth. That's, you know, what was it? The Oompa Loompa, I did some press conference with the rest of the cast, and everyone was answering questions about how much they loved doing it. We love doing it. I love working on it. So just as a joke at the end, when they said, "What about you, Hugh?" I said, "Oh no, I hated it." To get a laugh in the room.
I've seen that headline out there, presented as fact.
That is now fact. That Hugh Grant hated playing the Oompa Loompa.
Would you like to set the record straight here?
Yeah, I love playing the bloody Oompa Loompa.
I'm so glad. I loved watching it.
Oh, thank you. But that's how it works. So I think you've got to be quite, unfortunately, rather sort of careful now, if you care about that. But I think I've developed an immunity. These are ridiculous little storms that blow through.
Well, and you've also done so much work on really serious press violations. You know, the Hacked Off campaign has taken up a lot of your time, with 10 years now at least. So do you feel like you're keeping your eye on the real issue in media coverage, and the kind of the smaller storms feel tiny compared to that?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, anything about yourself is or should be kept in strict proportion. It's not important. There are bigger issues in life, and it's quite soothing to try and keep that sense of proportion.
Does that still feel, I mean, not a focus because you're doing great acting work as well, but the work with the Hacked Off campaign, like, does that still feel like a really essential part of what's, you know, for the next 10 years for you?
Yes, it does. And, but although it's, you know, originally that was about the way the British newspapers run our country and have run our country for 30, 40 years, that politicians in our country, when making key decisions about policy, their first criteria is not what's good for the country. It's how will this look in the Daily Mail and or the Sun. And I think that's tragic, and you know, we think that's tragic, and that they're too powerful and they've been allowed to live above the law, and that's why they were in fact abusing people with children who'd been killed in terrorist incidents or whatever like that, and that's why we've been campaigning. But that now also blends into the impairment of public discourse, of democracy by the algorithms of social media. For me, I can get as angry about those now.
Oh yeah, does that feel like the next step then? The kind of that's what the
yes,
the
and I'm sitting there cheering on, for instance, the EU for really taking on the social media platforms and saying you can't just say I'm not a publisher, I'm just a platform. You know, how unmanly. You know, you've got one life, you've made shitloads of money anyway. Man up and say, actually, we won't have anything. We won't have terrorism. We won't have things encouraging young girls to harm themselves or, you know, make themselves absurdly thin and everything like that. And they're only doing it because they only maintain this platform status rather than publisher status, so they won't be sued. In the end, it's just about money. It's not about free speech. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the U.S., we're learning more about, you know, media that's Russian disinformation campaigns. And, yeah, sorry, please clap for him also. It's your stump speech, right? Your political campaign speech.
What's that?
It feels like you're running for office. You know, they're getting the applause. you got your lines ready.
Well, I'm a grumpy old man. Endless opinions.
I mean, we talked about how you kind of, you know, in your acting career, kind of learned to lean into what, you know, was important to you. But I'm curious for the Hacked Off campaign, or just in general, when did you learn that you have a platform as an actor, as someone who's well known, and that you wanted to use it and how to use it? Did that take a lot of figuring out?
Yes, much prefer actors who shut up, and always was that actor. And I used to roll my eyes at preaching lovies, and I still do to a certain extent. And you know, who do you think you are? Privileged, overpaid. I think there's a lot in that. But I got very angry about the way the British press was running the country. I got very angry about the abuse of, I don't know if you remember the Millie Dowler scandal in Britain. You know, this was a young girl who was abducted, and then one of our newspapers hacked her phone, and it gave her parents false hope that she was alive, and it was scandalized the whole public. And on that wave of outrage, I did finally put my head over the parapet and started speaking publicly. And I was even made to have a bloody Twitter account. I regret that. And yes, of course, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, great, people will listen just because it's, there's that famous person of Love Actually, and even august BBC news programs, the great News Night or Question Time, they'll have me on to talk about this situation or this issue when they won't have someone much more learned on the subject, or someone with a much more heartbreaking and powerful story, because they also are enthralled to the mistaken idea that people who've been in the public eye are going to increase their viewership. So on the one hand, you've got that, but on the other hand, you do look like a spoilt twat, because why do you think you're so clever or important, and you just overpaid lovey? I get that argument.
But there's no going back now, it seems like. Now that you know you can make this difference in this way, you can't undo it.
Well, you can throttle back, but I will never throttle back on this particular issue. And, and for me, one of the great things about it is the people I've met doing Hacked Off, this curious bunch of academics, lawyers, and these wonderful people with very, very sad stories, not at all from the world of show business or celebrity or anything like that, have become the greatest friends I've made in my life, and we're a very, very close-knit bunch. And that's been lovely for me.
Yeah.
Just when I get my most cynical about mankind or human beings, I think of that group, and I think, no, there are people I like.
That's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Do you ever have actor friends who are like, what are you doing? Why do you keep going on the news? Like, just go home.
Yes, or my brother. I think it falls to me as your older brother to say, watch out.
It's too late for him.
Yeah, too late.
I mean, for a while, it seemed like you were really focusing on that work. You were, not scaling back from acting, but it wasn't. But in the last couple of years, you pop up for, a small role in Glass Onion because it seems like it's fun to be there for a day.
Yeah.
Like, has a new balance come in for you, or just better stuff being offered to you that makes you feel like going back to the screen is more worth it than it was before?
There was a lull when I was really just doing Hacked Off, it's true. But it was partly Hollywood, after something about the Morgans, just thought, well, that's the end of him. And
that one movie, really? That's all it took?
Yeah. All my great friends in Hollywood, the heads of studios, who used to call me, I never heard from any of them again.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a wonderful cliche come true. And then gradually, after a few years, interesting stuff started to happen. Probably beginning with the Wachowskis. Yeah. And that built and built.
Did that surprise you when that moment happened, or had you paid enough attention to all the cynical Hollywood stories to be like, well, one day you're up, one day you're down?
No, it was definitely to be expected, but it's still quite a little shock, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, you show up in Glass Onion for a day, you reunite with Paul King, you do a couple films with him. Like, when you build those relationships with filmmakers or creators that you like, do you just say, oh, sure, I'll go on set with you, whatever it is? Like, are you at a point where you can make choices like that just to work with people who you like and see how it goes?
Yeah, well, everything's a punt. It's always a punt. You don't know when you sign up if you're going to get on with the people, and you above all, you don't know if you can play the role, but you get a feeling, you've got a feeling that you might be able to. I've had one experience where I was wrong,
Ooh.
And as it came closer and closer, I thought, I don't know how to fucking do this. I don't know how to do it. That was terrible.
You're not going to say what it was?
No. No. And with great apology, I just said, you should get someone else.
Oh, you didn't do the film?
I didn't do it, no.
Oh. What do you learn from something like that? Because you have to take the risk, like you said. Like, it has to be a gamble, but so when you do it and it doesn't work out...
I probably should have done it anyway, because sometimes when you're, oddly enough, I've found when you're not 100% comfortable in the role, it actually comes over quite well. And sometimes when you think, I'm bloody brilliant in this, you're rubbish.
So I mean, you said that you get away from the nerves by doing all the amount of prep, but is fear an essential element on some level of saying, all right, let's see how this goes?
I don't know if fear is essential. Fear really is the enemy. I do believe in film acting. I watch some of those, total geniuses, the De Niro's and the Robert Duvall's, the Gene Hackmans, and they're just so calm. They're so calm in front of the camera, and the camera just eats it up. It's just wonderful. And so I do think nerves are a nightmare. And I bore every actor I ever worked with. Do you get nervous in your close-up? Do you feel a bit tight? Meryl Streep does quite a good imitation of me asking that question over and over again. Meryl, do you get a bit tight on a close-up?
It feels like watching Meryl Streep up close was really a great learning experience.
It was. It was.
I think we could all guess that. Well, I mean, so preparing to talk to you, I watched Morris, which if you're British, you call it that. And there's a lot of close-ups in that. You're very young, your first film, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stillness in those close-ups. Like there's a moment where you deliver just the very simple line, I love you, in like the most convincing way possible. And I wonder if it feels like that, when you look at that or you think of it, does it feel like you were convincing in that time, or do you feel like...
No, I felt uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
There's one shot in that film where I remember thinking, this is how I should have done it. And I've screwed up the whole performance in the whole film. I was never completely comfortable, and yet it seemed to work.
Do you credit that to editing and directing, or do you think there was something that maybe even you didn't know?
There's a mysterious, very mysterious alchemy between role and actor that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and in that case I think it sort of did work, and it's not necessarily to do with how skillful a performer you are. It's just the camera can see something inside you that absolutely meshes with that particular role, and it all comes alive. Well,
you hear about actors, and maybe like De Niro, like you were saying, who just kind of know what the camera's going to see. Like they can, in their head, they understand what the camera sees. Do you feel like you've learned a little bit about that over time, of what's going to show up on camera?
Yes. And I was in the editing room for a few films, and that was invaluable, completely invaluble.
I feel like that'd be torture for a lot of people.
Yes, well, believe me, the first week or two is ghastly. But after that, you get used to it, and then you really learn. You learn what... De Niro is a very good example. I mean, I'm sure you know the famous bit in Taxi Driver with him standing in front of the mirror saying, what is it, you looking at me? Or you
talking to me.
You're talking to me. And he does it over and over again. Was in fact just him trying different ways of saying it, assuming that Scorsese were going to take one of them.
Yeah.
And then he just liked them all. Yeah, so that's acting for with the editing in your head. Quite difficult for the off-screen actor to know when to say their line.
Yeah.
But I think understanding the medium is quite important.
Do you know, like, do you get like a gut feeling when you step off of a set or wrap a film or something where you're like, okay, that went well. Like, I know I got what I needed there.
Well, as I said earlier, there are days you go home thinking, rather good.
And it was not good.
It's very dangerous. and I've known other times. I remember doing a romantic comedy with Sandra Bullock, and there was a key moment that we couldn't make work, and was rewritten, and we shot it one night, and it was rather expensive, and we were a bit nervous about it, and then we watched it on dailies, and it was awful. And, oh Christ, we've screwed the whole film. Actually, it's one of the best scenes in the film. So you can't tell till it's all put together, and what you really can't, and at least I can't tell anything till I've seen it with an audience or just one person.
Wow.
You could get the cleaning lady to come in and watch a cut, and suddenly you see what the film is. That you can't when you know the script inside out, and you've been sitting in the editing room for 3 months. You have no idea what you've got. Yeah. Until it's a real human watches it.
Did sitting in the editing room ever make you want to direct a film or make something of your own? I know you used to write your own material when you was on stage, in the beginning. It feels like it could happen.
Yeah, I think I would like to do that, but I know that there will be many weaknesses, but one of them would be, I think it's really hard to stay interested in the same story for, 2 years minimum. On and on and on, same story, even when you're deciding, which particular Foley footsteps to put on under the nurse.
You have to be really, really detail obsessed.
Yeah.
But you also do that when you're building these backstories for your characters.
I know,
Sorry,
but the backstory feels creative. It feels like this thing is growing all the time. It's changing its shape and substance. Whereas the same story, you're telling the same story for 2 years. Yeah. If you're writing it and then casting it and shooting it and editing it and post-production. And I think that I would struggle a bit with that. Yeah. I mean, I think Heretic is such a fantastic example of an inventive, original movie. It's going in theaters. It's the kind of thing that I think 3 or 4 years ago in the pandemic, we worried we would lose from theaters entirely. I think there's been a lot of panic about, is the industry still going to support interesting movies, new filmmakers? Like, do you sense optimism, not just around this movie, but in general, that we can still figure out how to make good movies and interesting stuff and, Well, that would be, I so hope that that's true. Yeah. I'm so sad. I mean, my local cinema just shut down after. I can't bear it. Wow. And I don't understand the instinct to prefer to stay at home trying to remember your username and bloody password to Disney Plus, rather than going down to the Fulham Road ABC and watching a film amongst people, and picking up their reaction. Yeah. I cannot understand it. But maybe part of the problem was the product. And that you are right. Films that are A, more daring, and B, about people might be coming back. And right in the vanguard, good old A24, so well done them. Well, and you're very cool just like them, so it makes sense. What's that? You're very cool just like A24. Very cool, yeah. As you said at the beginning. Exactly. So Heretic will play for an audience here at TIFF tomorrow. Are you, what's your strategy for seeing it with an audience, for seeing yourself? You can stay through the whole thing? Do you have to stay in the back? How do you handle it? Well, it'll be terrifying. Yeah. But you want to see it with an audience. Yeah, definitely. Even when it's yourself, Yeah, and I'll panic and I'll have a meltdown afterwards. But then it gets shown again the following night, and I might be calmer for that one. Yeah. But do you feel like, I mean, not that you'll make nothing but horror movies after this, but does this feel like a step in a different direction for you, in a direction you want to follow in going forward, what the next 10 years might look like? I'd like to make cool films. Yeah. I feel like we might have to end it there. That might be the perfect closing line. Well, everyone should see Heretic tomorrow here at TIFF. You'll be there. And thank you so much for joining me here on stage. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.